this, right? Thank you for the recording.
Sorry.
So the history, no, it's all good. Right. So you all know this history. I like to repeat it. He's speaking specifically to white church leaders and white community leaders who were typically not actually joining in the collaborations, but would issue statements often in solidarity, but not actually be on the ground in support with, much less walking with or advocating that their congregations join in on some of these protest movements and this kind of conversation, right? So he's castigating essentially who he frames as his colleagues within this. His letter from a Birmingham jail essentially elevates this castigation. So we begin essentially with the notion of, so if we're a localized community group of leaders, how are we building up our anti-racist networks, especially in public leadership roles? So that's largely who he was speaking to, were folks, not just white folk and white church leaders, but white church leaders who were in public leadership roles and seeing those roles. So I think there's a direct parallel to being a school board, obviously, within a largely of color school board city region within this conversation. So as a way of checking in, we can you all still hear my voice? Am I projecting loud enough? Okay, cool. So we want to touch base with everybody, bring you into the room. First thing is share a family tradition that you experienced over the winter break, whatever that may be. And then the second piece is connecting Dr. King's vision and legacy, is how are you leading his vision within Tukwila School District this year? So moving from the weekend and our kind of appropriative, hey, everybody celebrate Dr. King this one day or this one weekend, and instead thinking about how are you specifically leading Dr. King's vision within the school district in your board role this year. So 2 questions: share a family tradition, and how are you leading Dr. King's vision? And when you're ready, pop.
When you say family tradition, which break are you talking about?
Good question. Winter break, but this could also be, our very short current break. But thinking specifically about winter break, a longer break. Maybe that wasn't actually long for anybody.
I'll go and start us. So a family tradition I experienced over the break, have a lot of traditions around Christmas time. And so one of my favorites is the giving of Christmas pajamas on Christmas Eve, as well as just Christmas in general being full of music. So I sang like multiple services at a Christmas Eve service, and then opened Exchange Christmas Pajamas with my wife, and that was really special. I always enjoy doing that. And then how are you leading Dr. King's vision within Tukwila School District this year? I think there maybe are 2 small connections I can make, though I don't feel even remotely close to saying that, that I'm leading Dr. King's vision. But I think I'm really trying to increase collaboration, particularly with folks that are being most impacted. So supporting a task force of folks that are looking across the district at how we're basically employing safety and inclusion practices. And that's really being uplifting the voices of young people, particularly through that committee. That one. And then I think the other piece is really thinking about that quote component. I think there are times in which I'm silent and not as aware of the way in which that silence is showing up. And also, I do feel like I am a person that, when aware, tries to be really brave about calling things into the space that need to be named. So try to not be silent and lead that way.
Our family tradition on Christmas Day evening, we have Chinese food. But somehow, it's all my responsibility. And within the district, that his vision, I think Carly's quite right about the white silence. I need time to process things, so I don't always speak up when I probably should.
So I guess for me, family tradition, so over the break, my family is kind of scattered around the country, so we always get together, which this year was fun with all the air travel being totally messed up. But anyway, that I managed to do that this year. And leading, so one of my projects that I've been working on for a number of years is what I call equity in funding at the state level. So I've been working with a number of groups, one of them being a local group called the Equity in Education Coalition, which is primarily people of color that are working on this issue, among other things, in the Puget Sound area, as well as primarily at the state level. So we're trying to get a much more. Turns out we in the state have what I call a regressive funding system, in the sense that it puts more money per student to districts with low poverty than with high poverty. So that's an ongoing project for me.
I think the tradition that jumped out at me when you said this, and of course, tradition, you don't actually even know it's a tradition until you don't have it, kind of. But of gift giving. My family was always very generous and gift giving, and they had the ability to do that. But I also think of one of the things I love to do is give little gifts to all of our homeless folks that live nearby. And I just, that happened again, and I love seeing the looks in their eyes when they, get a $20 Dollar Tree gift card or whatever. It doesn't have to be much, just the giving, just the sharing. The leading of Dr. King's vision. I think one of the things I really want to be aware of is creating a culture where we can be learners and not having to be fearful while we're learning. And most of you know that I got caught in a situation where I needed to learn and it didn't turn out to be a safe space. So that's part of what I want to make sure our culture allows for. But also the other emphasis that I really care about is making sure everyone in the room has access to what's being said or what's being shared. Language barriers are just immense in this district. And how do we make sure everyone gets all the information and is treated fairly so that everyone has access? So that's kind of my thing. Dr. Hearn.
For me, you can't see me because I have the camera pointed out to everybody else, but so one of the traditions that I do is do a stocking, and it's filled with practical items. So typically what I do, I have 3 boys and they get practical items like some sort of chapstick. The one item that they always appreciate is a flashlight. I give them a flashlight every time.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, my boys are older now, 22 and 19 and 17. And when they opened the flashlights, my oldest wasn't able to be there, but the other 2 were. It's funny because they always say, I know we get a flashlight. I don't know where, I always need one. Like it's always missing. And I swear they played this 19 and 17-year-old just played with the flashlights for probably 10 minutes, like they were 8 years old. It was pretty funny. So they were just zooming it in and zooming it out and seeing how bright it was. And it was very, very cute for being late teens, still excited by a flashlight. So the other thing that I've been trying to do more, so I've started the student advisory, superintendent student advisory council, just trying to continue to elevate some of the youth voice beyond what we have our student reps for sure, but just wanted to make sure we connect that. And what I appreciate about the board is I know they're all wanting to hear more student voice, and I think it's great. Actually, you know, I think the more you incorporate the student voice, the easier it becomes to move things forward, because it makes it harder for other adults to refute what the students are really saying. At the same time, you know, making sure that when they're there, it's just taking into account that perspective. Obviously, there are a lot of other adult things and legal things, but if anything, having that youth perspective, obviously we were all in that position at one point, and we had that, you know, kind of awakening viewpoint of how we were seeing things. And so I think, like in education, there are lots of times where we make assumptions about what it was like, but our perspective is just different because the time is different. And so just being connected into that, and personally, what I'm trying to do is just continue to be open to hearing that student voice. And what I've heard just from some of the students that I connect with is some of them are, you know, very consistent in a lot of the priorities that they've had that I've connected with in students over the last almost 30 years. Like I hear a lot of the same prioritization of what they'd like to do. But I'm always intrigued about what new perspectives are, especially given the current context, whatever it is, the political context, the technology context, the impact that they're feeling from all of those pieces. I think those are the parts that why you always need kind of that student, young person perspective all the way down. Now, I'm not just talking about the high school students, but and I think Director Hoover's been pretty vocal about all that, all the way down to the elementary level. So, and it's great. You talk to them, it's awesome. You know, 5-year-olds have a perspective too. So it's just, you know, usually below the cabinet level, the literal cabinet, like the countertop. But anyway, it's great. So that's what I'm trying to do, is just make sure to continue to listen to that student voice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're also sharing. I do a number, like I'm in the kitchen throughout most of winter break. So I do a cioppino fish stew situation on Christmas Eve, which then goes out in you know, takeaway containers to all of my close neighbors. So they're always blessed with something that they don't know how to make, essentially. And for me, it's a nice gift giving of local folks around me. But then I make tortillas a couple days later with my godson. Is always is a tradition. And then we usually, although we didn't this year because the tortillas were really good, so we ate them all the night before. But on New Year's Day, we also make black eyed peas, and the goal is to actually have a couple tortillas left to eat the black eyed peas with. We didn't have that this time. But a number of basically being in the kitchen and throwing down, and then just having a number of folks around my kitchen table eating well is kind of meaningful food in that way. And I think about not just working with you all, but I've been thinking about Dr. King's vision. I've been trying to spend a little bit more time, not just in Tukwila schools, but in and around Tukwila community organizations, and trying to learn who's essentially organizing within Tukwila versus, as you all know better than I do, Tukwila-based organizers who are often actually at the state level or regionally and not actually very focused on Tukwila. So I've been trying to learn who's moving and shaking in beautiful ways and supporting which kinds of communities. in Tukwila versus just they have an address that says Tukwila, but they're not actually actively in Tukwila. So I'm learning a lot around some of what some of you already know, which is some of the struggle of being in Tukwila versus not actually being in Tukwila.
Thanks, Chris. And I'm loving your sultriness, but I need you to know, I need you to get a little bit louder because I have some background things going on. Normally, my children and I would be doing all kinds of things, but my three eldest, I have four, all moved out this year, which was great. However, we had to figure out what the new family traditions were. So they made one for me. I was trying to figure out how it was going to work. And they announced that we're getting together New Year's Day. So and by announcing, I mean, they just came over and didn't tell me. So that happened. And so they were like, hey, hope you're, like, literally just walked in the house and was like, we're here for game night and we want to play. And, and I was like, this is crazy. I'm not prepared. And they were like, oh, don't worry. We're going to Instacart some stuff and it's going to happen. And I was like, who are these grown people? It was great. I loved it. I loved sharing with them. And I love that they came up with the new family tradition. So that was really great. Game night is big over here in our area. We're hugely competitive. While I may not be leading Dr. King's vision within Tukwila, other than the work that I'm doing with the principals and with you, the board members, I am really excited to hear Dr. Herndon about the Superintendent Student Advisory Council, and also would suggest that you think about adding 2 student board members to your board. Oakland did that and it was highly successful in terms of being able to have board folks as junior board directors. Students in high school, it was so amazing to shift the dynamic of the board. In that vein, last year my son was a senior. Oh, you do have 2 on the board. Great. That's what I just hadn't met them. Last year, my son was a senior and he asked me to come and speak to his class. And I was a little nervous. And after I did that, I decided I'm going to do that every year. So going to talk to these high school students about racism and the way they experience racism is it's amazing. It's amazing to have those conversations, to create the space within classes, to hear them talk about their everyday experience with race. It's amazing to have here in the Bay, lots and lots of mixed race students who are dealing with, right, their own identity, because that's the age when you're trying to develop identity issues. And it's like, how do I do this when I'm mixed race? I'm trying to figure out how I have affinity for both sides of my own heritage. It's a lot. And we don't talk about that in classrooms enough. So that's the way that I'm trying to lead Dr. King's vision, is by really getting in front of high schoolers and having the conversations that we don't normally have in our classrooms.
Thank you. And I'm just going to keep us rolling because we have, I'm also mindful of a couple of you said this previously and today, of just not really having the time to process. And I think so much about how, I mean, this is what we do in school spaces, partially because we have so many children, so many adults, so many people within these places, but also we do this, you're right, first person to talk gets to then kind of shape the agenda. And we typically do not actually give ourselves space as educators, as leaders within these conversations, to pause, reflect, think about how we are, our own learning within this context, and then how do we then add to ongoing conversations. So I'm moving us forward, knowing that we also have created some space for us to reflect and engage much of this morning. So I'm going to read this. I think you all can see it. We acknowledge that we live and work on unceded ancestral land of numerous Coast Salish nations. In Tukwila, we're talking about Muckleshoot and Duwamish largely. We recognize ongoing displacement of Indigenous peoples and pay respect to all Indigenous peoples, past and present. We further acknowledge that the burden of environmental exploitation and systemic injustice falls upon the labor of Black and brown bodies in the building of this country and our institutions. We remember that Black and brown people were born and died working this land against their will for generations. We also acknowledge the continued contribution of the labor of survivors over the centuries to today of all immigrant labor, including voluntary, involuntary, trafficked, forced, and undocumented peoples in the building of what we refer to as the United States. This is our vague scope and sequence. We're not necessarily, the dates are not correct, obviously, because we've been changing these collectively. But today our second series around defining and disrupting. We'll talk about a little bit more around anti-Blackness and whiteness in juxtaposition with each other, and then really the role of school boards and school board members in leading anti-racism.
Those were the dates of our sessions with the principals. That was just to share with you that we're doing this work in tandem with your school leaders. So those dates are fairly together, except for the November 30th one that, oh, we did change it to February 2. So that is updated. Those are correct dates. So this is the work before. I think a couple of you asked us, could you attend the principal meetings? And we've decided to keep those separate, just so the principals can feel comfortable in having these conversations. But we want you to know what the work is that we're holding. So this is what we're doing with your school leaders in tandem to the work that we're doing with you.
And go ahead.
And these are our goals, overarching goals for the entire school district. And so we call these the 5 Ds. And so we're thinking about, and we share this every time, right? So this is not new, but our theory of action indicates that we can't just jump into the work without knowing what we're talking about. So we want to make sure that we define, right, those core, and we're going to continue to do that. And sometimes it's define and refine, right? And then as we are defining and we're all clear about what we mean, then we can strengthen our skills to disrupt. So one of the things that happens frequently in school districts is we talk about equity, but everybody has a different definition of what equity is. So let's get granular. Then we can disrupt. And then when we dismantle, right? And I think about disrupting, I used this before, right? Like dominoes are falling and you place your hand in the middle of the fall so that we are disrupting that pattern of things that are happening. And as a school board, you are uniquely poised to do that, right? So we define, we disrupt, and then the way to dismantle is to follow Dr. King's notion of community building so that we link arms, literally like he did in that photo, to disrupt the movement that's happening. But not just so that we can define, disrupt, and dismantle, which sounds like tearing something down, but the rebuilding of dreaming and designing what's possible. I said this last time we met, and I'm going to continue to say it every time we meet. Tukwila is uniquely poised to dream and design what could be possible with your size, right? You're large enough to have an impact, but small enough to be nimble. And so we want to continue to work with you to think about how do we dream and design things that we want to be different. So this is our scope, is our goals and our scope and our theory of action all rolled into one. So specifically today, always wanting to continue to build the brave, accountable space and to define some of these concepts. We want to do a quick review and then look a little bit at street data, and then what's our role? What's our role in leading anti-racism efforts? And we're going to be your facilitator, your timekeeper. We ask that you be an active participant. Here's our flow. I feel like we're a little bit on time, a little bit behind time. It's all good. This is what we're doing. But we're really going to talk a lot about how do we, what's our role individually and as a school board to implement the vision of anti-racism within Tukwila. and then talk about some next steps. I'm going to let you read over these community agreements, and then I'm going to ask you to think about one that you really want to sort of hone in on. And so these are our agreements. I'll give you 30 seconds to read them over. And then if each person could say, today I'm focusing on one, which are one of these. And when you're ready, just popcorn in, which hope we're all, as a community, we're all going to be agreeing to all 5 of these, but you might want to hone in on one. And when you're ready, just popcorn out.
I think for me, what's resonating today is the anchoring our work in critical pedagogy.
I'm gonna try to remain open to new ideas. I'm pretty good at coming in with preconceived notions and wanting to defend them. Got to stay open.
I love that. And thank you for just acknowledging that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, anytime, we're doing training, it's open to new ideas.
Director Morris had to step out real quick. Obviously, the challenging one for me is the green one, confidentiality and focus on the work. Public meeting being recorded, there's not a lot of confidentiality in it. That's just the kind of I think that's the one I always have the biggest challenge with, at least in the board work sessions, is just because they're public. I mean, I think in the work in the other ones can be a little bit easier for that. So for me, I'm just trying to figure out how to connect that one to this.
Yeah, no, that is challenging when we're recording and anyone can see it. And I think confidentiality is really about how we respect each other outside of the meeting. So yes, things can come up and it's being recorded, but it is not up to us to run to Carly and be like, when you said that on the recording, I feel like this is that, right? That's the breaking of this notion of we're holding the space sacrosanct, right? And so even though people will be able to see it, we respect each other enough to not have judgment and to not come back to people later and be like, I want to talk to you about what you said on that, right? This is the space to have those conversations. And after that, we leave that where it is. So hopefully that can be a little helpful.
Yeah.
And I think we had one director come in.
Director Morris, yeah, she just came back in.
Good one.
Okay.
Yes. Can I get a little debrief about what was?
Yeah, so
We're looking at those.
talking about which one we're gonna focus on today.
Okay, and this
2 of us said remain open, 1 of us said critical pedagogy, 1 of us said confidentiality.
Beautiful recap.
I was paying attention.
well, I think we have to, the honoring people is very important. As we remain open with new ideas and held accountable, I just think they're all, it's hard to separate those.
I love it. Absolutely no problem. We just ask that you remember those as we're moving forward in what could be a little bit difficult conversation. So this is just a reminder of how we move, and we talked about this last time, so given time, I'm not going to really delve deeply into this, but Chris and I believe are really unique in that we bring all these years of experience, and we believe we're both critical race theorists, but we model what is possible and across numerous differences, right? Gender, race, beliefs, all those other things, like we model what can happen. So we know that it's possible in numerous spaces. We shared this quote before, love it. always want to share it again. So somebody could just read this quote.
The beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be an anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. And it's the only way forward.
I love this quote and we'll use it almost every time. Chris and I think people have said to me personally, well, you know, I'm going to work on being free of racism and then I could do this work. And I was like, well, we'll never get to it. Right. So like the notion of the permanence of racism, one of our critical race theory concepts is that it's permanent in this, in what we call the United States. I love, Chris, that you put that in there. And so the notion is it's a commitment to fight it wherever we find it. It's every day and all the time. So I shared with you that I'm having my house remodeled. You know, people are walking down the street and they're looking at, you know, the work that's going on. And I was on my mom's porch. So I own a duplex and my mom is downstairs. That's where I am now. I was on her porch doing something, I don't know. And a lovely neighborhood white woman walked by and said, you know, out the blue, hey, do you know the owners? And I said, what? And she said, do you know the owners? Are they going to sell? And I said, oh, I'm not sure. And she said, oh, it would just be a shame to, you know, sell and then have to move people like yourself, right? And I had to pause for a moment because nowhere in her sense of privilege, sense of whiteness, nowhere was the thought that I could be the owner of this property. Nowhere. So it was, do you know the owners? And I would hate for them to sell because then that would move you. So the assumption is I'm a renter. And it is, so, you know, the very first thing would be like, my grandmother used to tell me, don't open your mouth if you're not sure what you're talking about. You know, like that might be one thing. But I think the other thing is, as an anti-racist, I had a choice to educate her or to not educate her. I chose not to educate her because I was too taken aback. But our views, and that's why I love that you're coming in with being open to new thoughts. Our views are based upon who we are, how we grew up, and all those other things. And nowhere in her entire imagination with this Black woman, I did have on a hoodie because it's raining, with this Black woman be the owner of this property. Racism everywhere and all the time.
Thank you for sharing. I also appreciate, I say appreciate with the asterisks or something, quotes next to it. Like a recognition that there's some kind of problem, gentrification, removal of people of color from their communities. But a very passive, like, let me acknowledge that this is happening, not find out any information about who you are as a person, so much less be able to engage in some sort of way of supporting. Were you actually renters? Like that wouldn't have helped either, right? Because it's just like, oh, I recognize that you might be displaced right now. I hope that's not the case. Let me keep it moving, right? Like it's such a passive way of like not engaging, making assumptions, racist assumptions, but then also just like, I recognize there's a problem. I'm just not going to engage in it. I'm just going to recognize it and let you know that I see it and I'm not doing anything about it, even though it's not the problem. Anyway, so many levels of racism in that.
So many levels of racism. And we bring this up as an example, right? Is that if we're really going to live this quote, and if we're going to live Dr. King's vision, we got to check that in self first, right? Like let's check our own assumptions. Let's check our own biases, right? Let's check our own privilege. So it's the commitment to fight it wherever you find it, including in yourself. And it's the only way forward. Right? So many different ways that this person could have spoken to me on that day. So we offered this last time as a vision that you could start to think about, right? And we asked you what you thought about it. And if you recall, I know it was way back in October. If you recall, it was really deep for some of us to be like, I kind of feel this, but I'm not sure if others feel it. I'm not sure how the community would react. So I just wanted to take a moment to look at this again, right? Like, number one, we have to understand our own complicity. And I think saying that is both scary, but also reality, right? As an educational organization. And then our commitment is to basically fight, right? Racism where we find it and help to dismantle it. And so we're going to take some action around that. And that could be, think how that could be a huge statement on your website as board members. Like, here's our vision for the next 5 years, right? So next slide. Thanks, Chris, for doing this. I appreciate it. We wanted to break you into 2 small groups. Not sure how that's going to work, but we want to figure out how does the board demonstrate this type of anti-racist vision, right? And so, Chris, what are we thinking about? I feel like some of you are both in person, but you're also on the screen. So I want to get Carly in there. And so, what are we thinking?
We could probably do one in, I noticed that, I mean, some of you have your laptops in front of you. So I think if you actually move to a different space and might even be able to be in the same room, we could probably have one group that's talking in person and another group that's talking through laptops.
Yep.
If that makes sense. We're relying on you all to make this happen.
Everybody does have a laptop here.
Okay, so what I'm thinking is, because we don't have the ability to put you in Zoom rooms, unless Flip, you can give us that ability.
Or you could just create 2 rooms, Dr. Herndon, and then put people.
Or you could just create
Yeah.
2 rooms yourself.
If you have that,
Do you think this group is small enough? We could do one?
or we could do one.
Well, what we heard from you last time is you really need the time to talk and to to try and process. And we thought that smaller groups would be helpful, but we could do one whole group, understanding that I'm flexible.
Mhm.
Is the room large enough where I could get like where I could get 3 of you in a Zoom room, or 3 of, if we can't do through Zoom rooms, 3 of you with Carly, 2 of you with Carly, and the other 2 of you talking together? Is the room large enough for that?
Probably, yeah, probably.
Okay. So if I could get 2 of you to engage with Carly with your laptops, and if I can get the other 2 to engage together, that would be great.
Sure. I mean, okay, Dave and I go with Carly and Flip and Edna.
Okay.
I don't know.
Sure.
I love it.
I would probably say two board members in each group.
2 and 2. Yeah.
And then Dr. Herndon, you can choose a group.
Okay.
That is much better.
to-
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, all good.
All right,
So I'm with Carly.
so Dave and Carly and Edna.
Oh, okay.
Not to make it more complicated.
Would you also be able to just go back to the slide before,
Yep.
just so I can look at that again? Thank you.
Yeah, and we can leave this one up.
Absolutely. Okay, so 2 of you with 2 and 2, Dr. Herndon will go where we need to go. We're gonna be, the question is, if you could just go to the question for them too, and then we can go back. How are we demonstrating this vision, this anti-racist vision that we're proposing? And we'll leave the vision up. And we're gonna be, it's 9:52. Let's be in breakouts for 15 minutes. Okay, are you guys getting up in, it's hard for me to tell what's going on.
I think I'm talking to Dave.
Oh, okay,
I
okay,
think-
beautiful.
So how do you?
If I'm gonna talk, should I?
You want to go
Turn
to
on
the,
my-
like the conference room? You could probably do
Well,
that.
Edna and I can just go sit out there.
Okay.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Oh, you're gonna be,
We'll just sit out here.
okay.
Is it one way?
Stop it. There's a smaller comment.
Carly, I feel like you're really laughing because you're like, this is what happens when we don't tell people exactly where to go. It's like, where am I going? What am I doing?
You know, I know this is like real life facilitator, just the logistics right here.
Absolutely.
I'm here with you for it.
Okay.
Okay,
I think we're set up.
Yeah.
beautiful. All right, I love it. We will come back at 10:05.
Great.
All right.
I think just kind of my initial thing that's coming up for me is thinking about I think at least I know this is my belief personally, and I feel like this is like the board understands this. I think maybe we're on very different levels of like our deep understanding of this, but I think our understanding the complicity that we all have within this larger system, I think is something that I see. I think what I'm really resonating with right now is, you know, as a person that, grew up, very much raised in whiteness, even understanding like what are those areas of in which white supremacy culture holds true, right? So this idea of as I learn more, I know more. And so peeling this idea of like it's continuing to peel back the layers and see more and become more aware of those things. And so I say all that to say is like, I feel like in many ways, we're inching towards that commitment, this vision being true, but I think there's still so much that we as a collective board maybe aren't even aware of, in which the ways the white supremacy culture is still so prevalent, I guess. If that makes sense. It's kind of my first thought here.
So I would agree with all that, which kind of to me argues for continuing to get, for example, more student voice into the situation and help better understand what's actually going on a day-to-day basis. The other things I was thinking about on this one, so when we're talking about our educational system, I mean, there's multiple layers to that. I mean, we're part of a bigger system that the state has set up, and there's so, I mean, I've been spending a lot of time recently working kind of at that level, but at the same time, there's also stuff that's closer to home. So one of the things I've been trying to kind of push on is for us to what I would call intentionally look for racist outcomes. Like in our data, I know, I mean, my sense is that we still have a lot of staff that doesn't really want to talk about it very much. And so we need to, like in some of the data, we need to be digging deep into intentionally looking for where the racial disparities, racial disproportionalities are. And so, that's part of this as well. So there's kind of a couple of things I was thinking about.
Yeah. I think another kind of, I mean, I think on a similar note, and just to kind of build off what we both said already, this idea of it's such a convoluted and big system, right? And so like dismantling and disrupting. So this idea of like having a vision or an understanding of like, what would a new way of operating look like that I think we don't have yet, which then makes it hard. And I think this is something that Dr. Rogers-Ard was speaking to a little bit, though probably not exactly, but this idea of, disrupting what we have to have, right? That dream of where we can go next. So I think like there are, it almost feels like the ways in which we're maybe putting little disruptions in aren't in the right places, right? Or like aren't at the ways that are really going to dismantle the system, and more just like poking holes in it. So I want to figure out like, what are the real ways that we can look at the system and the structure versus ways in which we operate within that system and the structure. Because I think about even with like data and how we look at data through our lens that is built off of this white supremacy culture still. And so how do we change that? I don't know. It almost like feels like it would be a completely different way of just operating, right? And doing business altogether. And how do we, what are those things? How do we dismantle those things? I don't know.
Yeah, I had an interesting, had a good meeting with Sharon Navas, who's the head of the Education Equity Coalition. And, you know, we were talking to some degree about which I guess we'll probably get into some, when we talk about the street data, but the achievement gaps and how you kind of look at those. It's become kind of popular to, you know, discredit that way of looking at it. And frequently what comes up is, well, you're assigning deficiencies to students, and that's not the way that she was looking at it. And the way I look at it is it's a deficiency in the system. So, and as street data points out, you know, you can look at that and say there's a gap. It doesn't tell you anything about how to fix it. It just points you there and says, okay, there's a problem and we need to figure it out. And street data, the book, does a really nice job of listing a whole bunch of techniques to actually try and get under the covers and figure out what's going on. So yeah, that's to me where a lot of the heavy work is to really, you know, get under the covers and at the lowest level and figure out, you know, what's going on with the system that needs to be disrupted and changed. So in terms of the question, how can the board demonstrate? I think it's through those, to start with, it's through those things, some of which we started doing, like the student advisory committees, and there's a whole, like I said, there's a whole bunch of other things I'm thinking over the years. You know, I mean, last year we did some interaction with the civics group up at Foster, and not only students but also community. I mean, we're still, when we did folks did a strategic plan review with communities, have really heard back exactly what they found, but a lot more of that kind of interaction to try and get kind of under the covers, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Herndon still sitting there?
Yeah,
He's here.
Any thoughts from your?
yeah, I think all of those items are good. I think you know, it's always a interesting aspect of going through part of the steps of looking at how to incorporate, like how you can start to make change, but also realizing that the entire community is not going to be going lockstep with you in those places too. So there's going to be pushback even in this community that's really diverse, because you do have a lot of people coming from different cultures who have different perspectives about how they view education and schooling and what they expect. And not just all from, you know, Caucasian or white folks. There's a lot of other folks that are people of color who have an expectation about what they want school to be. And some of that is still in a very traditional framework. So that resistance, even coming from the community that we have, will still be there. So that's why I think having a lot of those students just be able to provide that perspective about what they see, I think can be really good. I think street data does have a lot of good examples about, you know, how to help move that needle, because even though there are a lot of traditional things you can do, it's really about how you pose the questions when you're viewing the data, you know, at the building level with teachers or with students. It's like, what are the questions that come up and how might you be able to support things in a different way? So I think they're good. And I think you all are asking good questions. That's what helps move things too. So as I think about, you know, kind of what's the board's role in that, I think continuing to ask those questions within the data that gets presented is good. Again, I think a lot of what we're trying to do is have also, you know, key administrators who are people of color who bring that perspective is also helpful to that lens. Not that they, you know, corner the market on that, but it certainly helps bring a perspective where a lot of those examples, or if you're thinking about some of the traditional kind of who's populating which offices within a school district, we also kind of stand out in that perspective. We do have a more diverse administrative team, probably percentage-wise than most school districts, which certainly is helpful in this because it helps bring that perspective. So that's not the only answer, but I think it's helpful to be able to have a diverse perspective throughout.
Yeah, even thinking about, thanks for all that, Dr. Hernan. I think just, I'm kind of sitting with just that last thing you were talking about. And it makes me want to lean in and know, like, what is the experience of all of those, you know, administrators and staff of color, right? Because it's one thing to have them, right? But another thing to, like, understand the experience of those folks as they work and live within our district. Because I feel like that would be really how we would get the understanding of, are we dismantling white supremacy culture just versus are we allowing more voices at the table, right? So it's like that, and I think the same is true for, like, all of the, you know, getting student voice and perspective. I don't know, maybe kind of going back to, like, how do we, you know, making sure that we're always going that next step of not just tokenizing, right, those voices, tokenizing those young people, but really, I don't know. And I think there are so many ways in which we do that, but I'm thinking about, you know, of course, district from a large district-wide perspective. Yeah. How are authentic others' experiences? And I think, as I'm saying.
Right.
Okay, I heard amazing conversation. Can we come back together?
Yeah, I think Dr. getting the other folks back. in.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm gonna go top off real quick. I'll be back in 2
Yeah,
minutes.
maybe we should just take a 2-minute bio.
Good, I just got a quickie.
Okay, it's 10:07. Let's come back at 10:10, take a 3-minute bio topping off tea type sitch, and we'll come back in 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. These cookies were an experiment by these people that we work with that are together.
Yeah.
And so they came and tested it with us. We decided that they should not market it. So they gave us all the leftovers, and they're not terrible, but they're not necessarily good. Wow.
about my dreams.
I suppose you have to have a code to do that. Huh? Probably. So is your oldest knowing where he's going next now?
He's in upstate New York. He lived in Fort Drum. He actually just felt the last week he got in an accident, car accident that totaled his car.
Oh,
He's
no.
fine. It was on base. First stop sign, but there was an MP like sitting right at the end.
Oh,
Thank goodness. But he was kind of bummed because that was the car I gave him. That was my own car and I drove it out to North Carolina years ago. So now he's got to get a new car, but he's gonna be deployed again in August.
Oh, that's-
He's gonna be going to, I think, either Iraq or Kuwait. Yeah, that'll be his third deployment. He deploys, he's in units that deploy all the time, so yeah, his third deployment in 5 years.
Has it been 5 years?
Yeah,
Wow.
he's going to, he enlisted right out of high school, actually right before he graduated from high school. I tell people, he turned 18, we signed for him because he was technically 17, but he didn't want to wait for his 18th birthday, which was less than a week.
Oh, wow.
So he enlisted, he turned 18 and he graduated high school all in the same week.
Wow.
And his birthday is Flag Day, which is also the day that the Army was founded. So it's the Army's birthday and his birthday. Some irony.
Oh, destined to
Totally
be.
unintentional. Just happened that way.
Okay, hopefully we are, we took a little break. It's always good to walk away for a moment. And hopefully, I feel like Director Hoover, if you start to not feel good, tap out. You know what I mean? Like, because illness is illness. This is really important, but I'm keeping my eye on you and making sure that you're okay. Okay, so if we could just, and I love this configuration, Dr. Herndon, that you're giving us. So now I can see everybody. How are we, tell me what came up with these conversations. The question was, designed to get us to talk more about how we feel committed to this anti-racist vision. What was coming up for folks?
Go ahead.
I think a portion of it was kind of discussing, kind of how do we get at, what students are experiencing, in particular, and then translating that into action. And I think that is, yeah, having read most of street data, that's a lot of street data is about, is how do we get at that? And then,
Okay, thank you. I'm just taking some notes. Others, what came up?
Can I just share something that actually just came up just right this moment?
Yeah.
Reflection. So and this is more about like how I think I'm, so definitely, I think I struggle with perfectionism in a big way. Something I've been really actively trying to dismantle in myself, but I really struggle with that. And so what I think that tends to bring is just like a pessimism about things, right? And not really understanding or seeing the goodness, right, that happens along the way, right? Because I'm like, well, because we're not there yet, right? We're not where we need to be yet. And so this came up because even in the reflect that as we were talking about it, my initial reflection was, oh, well, we're not doing this well. We're not close enough, whatever. So just an big awareness right now for me about, yeah, even my mindset of approaching the work and nothing ever feeling good enough within it.
And
No,
I
thank
feel
you
like-
so much for that.
I feel like we're kind of stuck. Okay.
Someone else unmuted.
You're not.
I think we can hear you all if you are muted on your laptops, but in the room.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Got it.
No. Oh,
There you
go.
And I think we see where we want to go, and we see a little bit of progress that we've made, but I think I personally am stuck with how do we get going to where we need to be quickly.
I guess the other thing that came up was, so we know that, not everybody's gonna climb on board this thing, immediately or necessarily anytime soon. So, I mean, I think we talked about that last time, but with the coalition of the willing, kind of figure out how to move forward. And still acknowledging that there's going to be resistance and pushback from, potentially a variety of different sources.
I think also just to add on to that we're going to get it wrong, right? That acknowledgement as well. Which I think, yeah, I think for me kind of goes back to like the perfectionism piece of if we don't have the path forward, we can't move because we're going to mess up. But all of that is okay. It's a part of the messiness.
I think part of it we talked about was, well, if we use MLK as an example, he wasn't necessarily liked in his time. That he has a great big following now, but in his time he was pushing those front edges too far, according to a lot of people. And so, we have to be willing to push those edges and be uncomfortable or make people uncomfortable, and yet know that the mass of people will not be there on that front line. And so, how do we just acknowledge that? Or there may be other people in the district that are pushing that front line and getting resistance. And maybe it's our job to pull that coalition behind those voices. I don't know what our exact role will be, but it's somewhere either on that leading edge, being not necessarily liked by everyone, or in that second stage of it, following along and pulling people forward. I don't know if that made sense.
Thank you for sharing some of those pieces. I'm just going to address a couple of them. The first notion of how to get to what students are experiencing is the whole thing around street data. And so much in the same way Dr. Herndon was like the Student Advisory Council, and now that I know you have two student board members, the reality is listening is the main thing. So street data has all the tools, right, around how to mount listening campaigns. What does it mean to listen? They usually talk about disenfranchised groups, and there's no one more disenfranchised in the school system than the students, right? So that could be one very, very concrete, tangible action step that you decide to take as a board, as listeners. And there's a lot of ways to do it, so I'm not going to jump into all of that, but to really ask students to share. And, it starts with them writing and all these other things, but it's a way that we can start to elevate the voices of our students to know what they are experiencing. And it means that you have to create a lot of safety for students to speak their whole truths. So that's a lot of pieces, but that is definitely doable. I love that the vulnerability, Director Hoover, is saying, I'm a perfectionist. So number one, I'm like, I don't see it because it's not going to be perfect. I totally get that. And I also think, if I'm being honest, that when I speak to our leaders of color in the district, Dr. Hernan was talking about how it's a much larger diversity percentage-wide of leaders of color than in most school districts, and I would agree with that. When I speak with them, I think that they also have a level of pessimism, as many folks of color do whenever we have anything about racism, right? It's like, I've been here, I've gone through this, it's not going to change. Why, don't waste my time, right? And all of those things are happening. What we have to do, and this is why the define is so important in our theory of action, we have to define that this is not something that we get to and then it becomes finished, right? So the racism struggle, this is why we start with critical race theory, the permanence of it all, right? So then you're like, well, why fight it if it's permanent? Because if we don't make the strides forward, then we will never get to a place where it could at least be, our hope is that we can start to look at what whiteness looks like and decrease it as we increase the notions of folks of color. Racism in this country, the country is based on racism, so we would have to dismantle the entire country. Chances are that's not going to happen. But what we can do is we can make some inroads. And if we don't continue to do that work, then we will not have the strides that we want to have. So when we think about it being perfect, we're not looking for perfection. What we're looking for is improvement, right? And so reframing what is the goal of the work, I think, is really, really important. Also, remember our 5 Ds, the ability to dream and design something different, right? So it's not like, okay, if we don't eradicate racism totally, then we can't have anything for students. That's not it. What we want to say is what we have for students right now is whack. Can we dream and design something different for students that could increase students of color's ability to feel seen, heard, all the stuff on the 4 pivots, welcomed, all the belonging, all those things. What can we design? And it's always going to come down to how do we start to decenter whiteness is really what we do. So I hear you on that pessimism, and I would also call fatigue. Whenever I talk to folks of color, they're like, listen, I don't even want to go to those meetings, right? So we have to start reframing what we're looking for. And then I like this notion of, I feel like we're stuck, like we got here. Where do we go from here? We talked about the coalition of the willing, but how? And I believe that we spend a lot of time in education going, give me the 3 things I need to do tomorrow so I can fix it, right? And that's how we are as educators. We remediate. Oh my God, the student flunked the test. Here's what we're going to do to make that happen. This is not that work. This work is starting with people who understand, it's the quote, right? Like, it's a commitment to fight racism wherever we find it, even in ourselves and in our systems and in our classrooms. And we figure out what it means with that coalition to define, to disrupt, and to dismantle. And I'm gonna be honest with you, for some systems, disrupting is as far as we're gonna get. But even then, if we don't disrupt, what happens? So wanting to, again, it's about reframing what the work is. And what we were asking was, can we commit to this vision? So can we commit to the vision that says, we understand that we're an educational organization that's complicit in racist policies. We understand those things, and so therefore, we commit to fighting racism wherever we find it, even in ourselves, and we take action that says, these are the things that we're going to do because we're Tukwila. And that, thanks, Chris. Chris was like, it's time to go back to the slides. So can we say, yes, this is, I mean, we don't have to wordsmith it, and I'm not suggesting that we put it on the website tomorrow. But what we were asking is like, how do we lead this? And is this what we want to say to our constituents, to our public? This is where we are. In order to move forward, we got to know where we are, y'all. So like, is this where we are? And is this something that we're like collectively as a board, we can get behind? And that was the question.
Thanks for bringing us back to that question, the question. I think too, when and also for all of just, your incredible insights around all of that. I think I started when I first mentioned to Dave, when we first went in our breakouts, the first thing I said was, I actually think, I know personally, and I feel like based on what I know about each board member, that like that understanding around complicity is real. So like, I feel like we believe this, or I believe this. And again, I believe that my colleagues believe this. I think it's just now, what is next? How do we, what does this mean? So to answer your question, this is firmly where yes, I'm here for this, and all in on it.
Thank you.
I don't think we have any problem committing ourselves to it. Because I think each of us individually have things that we deal with in life that we have not the empathy for the racial inequality. But I think some of us have had things. I have a disability, and so I have experienced some of that. So I think my goal is to make sure no one else has to endure any of that in any manner that we can. So I'm totally committed to doing it. Again, we're committed to it. How do we get others committed? And I guess it's just by knowing that's what the board wants and expects and will work towards. I don't know. I guess I'm feeling a little, I'm very hopeful. I'm very positive that we can do this. I'm just, I just in a quandary of what do we need to do? What do we need to do to make it work?
I am so glad that we asked that question because it's on the way. We are marching towards that. Flip, I saw that did I overspeak?
No, I think those are all good things. And again, I believe each of the board members really do want to see the change. And also because they're doers, I think they do want to hear that. Tell me the 3 things we can do right now. So fits into those pieces, like what can we do right now? And we get that from some staff as well. And at the same time, I mean, again, it's a lot of it is about pacing and sequencing but you can't wait for ideal conditions, right? So these are the conditions that we have. These are the conditions that we're in. And it's finding the opportunities when they arise, along with working on the bigger picture. So it's that juggling act of bigger picture plus recognizing opportunities. when we see them.
I guess the-
Absolutely.
I guess the other thing I was thinking about is how do we go about defining where we are? So, you know, and I know this one has various controversial aspects to it, but for me, these racial achievement gaps that we've had, you know, in our system for years, that's part of where we are that needs to change. You know, there's other ways to look at it. Students' sense of belonging, you know, is an issue. It's all these things are related. So I guess for me, it's like to kind of delve down a little deeper into defining, you know, what it is when we say where we are. What exactly is that?
I appreciate that a lot, and I think we're going to get to that on the other side of the break, or at least we're going to start to get to that on the other side of the break. So Chris, if we can pass we already did the 5-minute break. So this is getting exactly to what you asked for. Almost as if you read our lesson plan. Right? So we're like, okay, we made a commitment. Yes, we're a board member. We want to get to it. Where do we begin? How do we start? This is the conversation that we want you to have. And we would love to do it in dyads, but we'll see how that works. I'll let Chris figure that out. But there are 3 books because we are rooted in critical pedagogy that we've asked you to start reading, right? And I just want to know, do all of you have these 3 books? Phenomenal. So if I did a quick overview, obviously, love the book Chris and I wrote, right? So, but the piece around Black educational leadership that's very specific for you as board members, we spend chapter 1 talking about race, critical race theory, all the things that probably we've talked about with you. Chapter 2 introduces the people that we interviewed, and then really hearing their voices in chapters 3 through 5, I think could be meaningful. We interviewed Black leaders, and we're working with leaders of color in your district. And sometimes people have no idea what people are thinking or feeling. And this was a safe way for the leaders that we interviewed, who were all principals, right? And district leaders, to really hear, like if you had an opportunity to jump in on a conversation with Black leaders, this is what chapters 3 through 5 give you that sense of. And I think it would be great for you guys to figure out how to read that more, to get a sense of, man, what are Black folks saying that is very, very real, right? And then street data, to which we've alluded numerous times. And I think the principals are reading this too. Street data really talks about the notion of how do we get to this thing around equity and some of the things that you brought up, Dave, and belonging and all those pieces. And for those authors, it's like, we got to listen. We've got to listen to young people. We got to listen to folks of color. You know, this notion of affinity groups only works if they're really in affinity, if people are in affinity by whatever is the determining factor, and then they can be safe so that they can really share the things that they want to hear, that they want to share. And then that information can be synthesized to others who are not a member of that affinity group, right? In street data, they're talking a lot about, okay, what does it mean to listen to students? That's what we talked about before. What does it mean to listen to marginalized groups in our communities, right? And how do we have to approach that? Lots and lots of work around that. So street data presents a framework for that. And then for pivots, is one of my favorite books to grapple with, which I grapple, right? Because Four Pivots talks about this notion of belonging, right? And actually really delves down into what does it mean for leaders to create spaces of belonging. I will be honest and let you know, I don't agree with everything that Sean Jenright says here, but I do think that there's enough with which to start to have the conversation, like as a leader, how am I preparing spaces where people feel seen, heard, belonging, engaged, right? This is going to be critical for us as board members. How are we creating districts? How are we creating Tukwila sense that this is a place where people can be seen, heard across difference, right? I think the triumvirate of these three like works really, really well together. And even if you've not started reading them, what we wanted you to do, so there's approaches in each of these books, right, that you could use. And this is not a checking for your homework type situation. But what we are asking is, what are some of the things that you can start to think of? What approaches might we start using to help decenter whiteness in Tukwila from your vantage point? And the reason that we want to really hone in here is because some of the things that you've already said. Yeah, we got a commitment. We talked about it. So now, what are some of the specific approaches that we think we could use in Tukwila to help decenter whiteness? So I want you to have that conversation, and we were thinking that you would have it in dyads. But before we give you into some breakout time, what questions have we raised for you?
I appreciate, Rochelle, the perspective about the breakouts, because again, I think that at least I know with our board members here, they are all learners and want to be able to have that perspective. Of course, everyone would love to be a fly on the wall for conversations that they can hear firsthand. But as you were talking about in affinity groups and things like that, we had, I'll just share that we had the last administrative one, we broke into affinity groups and they turned out to not really be affinity groups. And it changes the conversation. I mean, there are times where you're not going to be able to be a fly on the wall. And you just have to let people have those conversations so that they can do what they need to do and then trust the information that comes out. So I'm the same way. I mean, I would love to be in so many classrooms or meetings with teachers or students, but I also always have to be aware that there are times where my presence disrupts honest conversations or safe conversations that people need to have. But it's a challenge because I love to have those things too, you know, just to be able to be there. And I'm pretty good about working in a stealth mode, but yeah, it's just one of those things that can be a challenge sometimes. So as you talk about these particular pieces, they all present such good information, all of these books. I appreciate the three of them and how they work together, which is also why I bought, 50 copies. We've got them to be able to hand out all administrators, our race and equity teams, our board members. So at least we all have also that ability of perspectives, authors. This is again, being rooted in the pedagogy, which I think is super helpful.
Thank you. And thank you for that vulnerability. My church has a Black male affinity something, and they go once a month and go do stuff. And every woman, right, is like, can we come? And it's clearly for Black men, right? And we're like, so we can't come. And especially the wives, right? They're like, so I feel like they try and find out where they're going and then just show up on their own. That's just a natural inclination. We're like, what are you talking about? And how can I learn from it? And what insights can I glean right? But people need space to be away from, to be in affinity with like-minded people, to share honestly. And what we have to do as those who are probably not part of that affinity group is to wait and be able to say, you know, what can you share without breaking confidentiality, and from a place of how can I learn? The other thing, though, is we also have to decenter ourselves. So in that example with the Black male group, I had to say to myself, this is really not for me, right? Like, I want to know what they're talking about so I can glean some things that might help me get along better with people. But that's not the purpose. The purpose is so those Black males can go in and they can grow and they can feel safe. And so I have to remove my need of wanting to know and center their need of needing to be in that space. So I totally get it. And I think what we have to do for our students, right, is to be able to create spaces where our students can, and that's why I said it starts with writing. It starts with them having their own conversations, and then they can perhaps feel safe to speak to power. Because you understand, as a board, you're not just bringing yourselves in the room, you're bringing power in the room. And so being able to create that for students and for our leaders, it's critically important for everybody, right? But decentering our own need when we are not part of that affinity is the very, very first step.
I do have another kind of question, a little bit before I think of it, as I think about approaches. So one of the things that I feel like I'm still trying to learn, and I'm not sure if other board members can resonate this at all, probably not Dave, because Dave is very seasoned, but really like what our roles as board members are in collaboration with the administrative team, right? And, you know, the practice of things is going to look different. Again, this is from what I've been told and understand about the structure of how things are supposed to operate together, right? A lot of the in practice things, the implementation of things are really designed and supported by, you know, superintendent and his team. You know what I mean? And then, so I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. And I think when I think about leadership, and I know it's certainly come up already here, I think in a way, you know, this idea of, you know, it's about how do we make change? It's, you know, it's showing up the way that we show up every day, right? In practice, in those little moments, the behaviors in which, you know, ways in which we call things out, or and so on. And so, you know, I think that is kind of one of our primary tools as board members, generally speaking, as well. So I think that's, I'm a little bit asking, does this look different within the context of the structure that we have to live within as a governing board with the superintendent? Or are we really thinking about how we're redesigning all of that and living and trying to operate as a board superintendent team perhaps differently than what was presented to me when I went through board boot camp, you know, last year. So a little bit of a practical question, and also just something to grapple with. I'm curious other folks' perspective. Because I think that changes the approach that I feel like we could take if the approach is not as much in our hands, besides the modeling leader component.
No, thank you so much. And I would love to hear from other board members. I think what I'm hearing is, do we have to be a traditional board, or what are the ways that we can flex that traditional hands-off that I've seen with other boards? And that would be up to all of you to dream and design what that looks like. What I will say, from having worked with 6 different boards of in 6 different school districts, it's going to be imperative that our board members as elected officials are knowledgeable about our educational system, knowledgeable about what our site leaders go through, knowledgeable about what our students go through, gaining the additional knowledge base before shifting into a non-traditional role, right? So being very transparent, there's a couple of school districts with which I worked in, the principals were like, but they don't even know what we do. And the board is like, well, we want you to do these things. And the principals were like, you have no idea what I do. And then this is the Christopher Canals. They were like, so board members they don't come in, they don't go to my school, they don't show up in the community, they don't attend the community meetings. They're just like in this lofty thing. And I'm not saying this is you guys, I'm saying this is what I've heard from other board members. So as we start thinking about what our approaches could be and how we shift, I think the critical piece is really that, how do we respect and honor, right, what people are doing? And the way to do that is to perhaps show up, but also to educate ourselves in some of the things that, have changed. If I were to teach a high school class now, I haven't taught a high school class and I don't know how long, like everything is different, right? Our students are different. The ways in which things move are different. So being able to educate ourselves with that. And I'm sorry, Chris, I jumped right in. Go for it.
This all good. I appreciate raising the question. We posed this question in two parts. What the first part is kind of the dreaming and not designing, but the dreaming of what specific approaches could we be doing. The second part of the question that we're going to get to after this is, what is the role of the board and what is the role of the individual board members specifically? So part of that is that we intentionally separate those questions, because otherwise we already start thinking about all the barriers that have been put around what we think our roles are. And with love to WASDA, right, like how we do board trainings and how we do trainings, I will say generally for public governance officials, is designed to constrain rather than foster and encourage you all to, right? And part of that is understandable. It's like there's legal constraints and people are like, wait, don't do shady things with the resources that you have. But I think we go way too hard on constraining versus how do we actually empower you all to think creatively about moving outside of the structures that are in place to support white supremacy, right? It's like we just drop that to support white supremacy. That's why these structures are here, right? We constrain you so that you continue what is already there versus so that you think about how do we do something different, right? So there's an intentional constraining. Again, not just to throw WASDA, it's bigger than WASDA, obviously, within this. So we try to separate those. I will say I've also been on a number of school boards and other board conversations, not elected. There's a totally different role within that. I will say the folks who, I say this is the same thing about who becomes a professor and who becomes in these kind of leadership roles, public intellectual leadership roles. Most of the more creative folks that don't want to step into these roles because these are so constraining. So a lot, and it's not to say you all are not creative, right? But there are fewer artists. There's research around this, right? There's fewer artists who live as an artist, right? In school board roles, there's fewer folks who like embody a little bit more of professional creativity in these roles because they're intentionally constraining, right? So we exclude folks, and I think we'll come back to a number of you have also talked about essentially how do you bring in and not to have you all leave, but how do you nurture in next generations of leadership, specifically leadership of color from, right? This is all the same kind of conversation. Well, you're not structurally designed to actually be mentoring leadership roles to tap into when you resign from the board to the next. You're not structurally empowered to do that as well. And yet, right, what is your like political secession plan? And how does that align not with what you're framed to do as the role, but what your actual purposeful, right, like nurturing in more folks in the local community who are already tapped into spaces and places, but not necessarily these sort of public, right, roles. So we'll come back to that because that's a kind of a mentoring plan, but there's some things you can do concretely around that mentorship as well, right? When we don't think about the constraints. So other questions, reflections before we task you with what you asked for, which is more time and space to think about specifics that you can be doing. You being, right, the district as well as your own roles, right?
Yeah, as you're talking, I was thinking, this issue of board versus superintendent roles and so forth. I think in this context, it's important for boards to be able to kind of define, and we were talking about this, define what the, you know, what the, where we want to get to or go to, and then, you know, Rochelle's talking about the knowledge. I think that's really critical to then facilitate a transparency in the system about exactly what's going on and why it's going on and all of that. And so I think that tends to, you know, without, you know, dictating to the superintendent what exactly he should do. I think that it kind of, I'm a big fan of, you know, showing light on things, and then more likely good things will happen.
So what I'm hearing, and I'm also aware of time, what I would love us to do is maybe, instead of going into dyads, let's have the conversation about what are some approaches, understanding that you've not finished doing all the reading with the 3 books, but what are some approaches that you could even brainstorm right now that could help us decenter whiteness within Tukwila? I would like to recommend that we do that, Chris, for maybe the next 10 minutes and then give them a break, because we haven't given them a big break yet. And I want to also commend you guys for sitting through, I know you sit through board meetings, but for sitting through the training without having a significant break. So maybe for 10 minutes, like, what are some approaches that could help us decenter whiteness in Tukwila? And I'll take some notes.
One of the things that you know, we talk about this a lot, is decentering that data, decentering the test score data or the demographic data that comes through a specific lens. And the only way that I know how to decenter that is to bring in the story alongside, the narrative alongside from our folks, whether it's staff or students or community. And is there, I envision a way, or no, I don't envision, I dream of a way of at least equalizing those two things. So highlighting more the story, the voice, the along with the data, the traditional data. Yeah.
This might tie slightly into the test score component, but I think about just decentering whiteness in our instruction. So, you know, finding more, just kind of looking back to at what are these pages in street data this around, you know, the referrals and how that principal responded to the referrals. And like, I know that principals in our schools are doing that within their capacity that they can, right? So how do we create conditions where that can be possible more frequently, right? With every student, where every student gets the opportunity to have those moments where someone's really seeing them and their need in that moment.
So over the years, one of the most, I think, enlightening things that I've done at Fife High School, there used to be, I'm not sure they're still doing this, a part of the graduation process was for students to reflect on their experience, their educational experience in the school, and then they would present that to some of the staff, and I got an opportunity to sit in on some of those presentations, and you know, it was, in one sense, it could be a checkbox, but the staff didn't let the students get away with that, so they pressed them to be authentic, and some of those discussions were some of the most, they got the best insights into what was going on, because the students I mean, the staff did a really good job of bringing out, from the students, really thoughtful about, you know, what they did well, what they didn't do well, what barriers did they come up against, all that kind of stuff. And so, you know, having some more of that, I mean, I think, they talk about shadowing, I mean, there's a number of techniques here in the street data, that talk about kind of getting closer to students. I was at we talked about WASDA meeting with one of the school districts, I think Kelso talked about school districts or school boards going out and spending lunch with the schools, and then having a group of students then come up and they ask them fairly simple questions, you know, what's going well, what's not going well, what do you wish, you know, we should talk about that we haven't talked about. So, I mean, there's a whole variety of ways to kind of really hopefully get to students in a space where they can feel authentic and really talk about what they're really feeling. So I think any of that kind of stuff is really helpful.
Think about like the voices that are present, right? So, and versus like really reaching those at the margins, right? And uplifting those voices. And I think this has come up in conversation, particularly around student voice, you know, even with the student representative positions, you know, oftentimes it's the folks that are already highly engaged in their schools, right? That are already, you know, identified as the strong leaders or whatever. But how are we really finding everybody else, right? Spaces to get it connected to everybody else, and really uplifting those voices that aren't normally going to speak up. And that's true, I think, of, you know, families as well, right? How are we reaching out to families, right? Rather than always expecting those, you know, those families that have the ability to be present at a school board meeting, or be present at a PTA meeting, that all of their voices are heard. In it again, and I think I have to say with in an authentic way, right? Not just we're going to check this box and say, yep, we talked to this many parents, right? I'm really making sure we're talking to the right people and doing the right things with that feedback.
You see the thing I was thinking when Jan was talking about decentering. I probably wouldn't put it that way, but I agree with the underlying idea that, so to me, you know, one of the things we need to do is actually intentionally look for racial disproportionalities in the data, but then also the really, and we've done some of that, some people do it better than others, but the more important side of that, which I agree with, and that is dig underneath. What are the stories? What are the, you know, what are the root causes of it? Because, you know, and that's, I mean, there's several cases in the book where they talk about, you know, you started with disproportionalities in discipline, for example, but that just kind of makes you turn the flashlight on and highlight somewhere, but you have to really go now, dig down deep into that area. And if you don't do that, then the problem, I mean, there's lots of stories, I forget whether it was this book or maybe another book I was reading, that then if you don't dig down deep, then, you know, maybe administrators are going to come up with some solution that, you know, maybe they learned somewhere or traditional, they've tried it everywhere, somewhere else or something, and without really understanding, you know, the specifics of the underlying cause in the type of school district or something like that. So I think that's the yeah, you need both.
One of the things, thank you, I've gotten all those are great. As we get ready to go into our break, I'm also wondering, what are the ways that we are intentionally decentering white spaces, all white spaces, like our board, right? Like, I understand that you guys have terms, right? But there are other all white spaces, and part of decentering whiteness, all the things that you brought up, love data, because we understand that data has a lot of implications for how we see particularly our students, always in our instruction, always, right? And then, examples of ways that you can go in and be more engaged with your students. And I'm also concerned about the adults in the system, right? So what strategies are we using to mitigate the whiteness in our system, right? By the people who are in our system, as board, as a central office, as, right? I think our school leadership is very diverse. What about our central office? Like, so I want us to be thinking consistently about how we, as one of the things Chris and I hear all the time is that the student body is the most diverse in the state or nation or wherever, right? And yet, when we look at our board, when we look at our central office, these are some of the ways that we also have to think about how we decenter. And I said this to the principals and got a reaction, so I'm just gonna say it. Sometimes decentering whiteness means loss, right? It means that someone who had a position or someone who was in a position intentionally moves out so that a person of color can move in. And when I think about this, most readily, I think about Serena Williams' husband, who was like, I'm on this board of this great company, but I think that there should be a person of color. I understand the privilege. You guys are going, they have a lot of money. I get that. But what I'm saying is he intentionally moved aside so that a person of color could take that position. And what I'm wondering is, as we go into break, not something that you need to answer today, but we have to start thinking about, where are the places where we might be able to position someone who is more marginalized, more disenfranchised, as we think about decentering whiteness. And that's a lot for folks, which is why I ask it right before a break. So I think we've only given you like a 2-minute break. So we're going to take a 15-minute. Maybe you might want to get a little bite to eat, stretch your legs. Is it cold out there in Tukwila today?
It's sunny, maybe a little chilly, but not too bad.
Okay, see, that's good. We are in the midst of the worst storm that California has ever seen.
Yeah.
So I feel like I didn't come up to Tukwila because I was like, it's gonna be cold, and now I'm getting punished for it with the flooding and and we don't know how to deal with any of this. Everybody's roof has holes in it. It's really bad out here right now. So that's an interesting paradox. Let's come back at 11:15. Thank you.
I'm gonna pause the recording, so then I'll bring us back later.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're back. Apologies for taking such a late break, but I felt like the conversation was so good, and we were doing what we needed to do. So we just went straight through. That was basically the answer. We powered through. So what we have here, Chris, if you could go, apologies, I know I said go straight to the Jamboard, but if we go to that question so they can all have the link, right? What we're going to do now is to do exactly what you talked about. Like, what's our role? Where does it fit? And there's a couple of ways that we're going to do this. We're going to ask you to take about 5 minutes to think through what's your role collectively as a board, and then your role as an individual member. So we're asking 2 questions here. What is your role as a school board? What's your role as an individual member in leading the efforts that we named, and also just anti-racist efforts in general, right? And what we're going to ask you to do is to click on the link for the Jamboard.
Link is in the chat as well.
Pardon me?
Link is in the chat.
And the link is in the chat as well. When you click on that link, what it will do is take you to a Jamboard. And so I want to make sure that everyone is familiar with Jamboards. So yay, thumbs up if you've done a Jamboard. Okay, 2 people, 3, okay, great. All right, so what we have here, and I'm just gonna walk you through it. after you've gotten through sort of brainstorming what your role is, there are 2 pages here. And we want to create this jam or jam board so that you have a record of it, so that when we meet with you again in March, we can come back and be like, okay, here's what we said, right? So page 1 is the question, what's your role as a school board? And what you want to do, Chris, since you're sharing, I'm gonna have you do this. You have options, for those of you who've not done this before. On my left, which I guess is your right, it's kind of hard to, right. Okay, so you have options on how you want to respond on your Jamboard. You can use the pen. And then the pen just allows you to write what there you go, right? So you can just write your answers. There's an eraser. And oh, wow, Chris, you're really good at that. Okay, I see you. Then you can erase what you just wrote if you're like, this is whack. All right. You can also select a sticky note, which is my personal favorite. And then you can choose your color that you want for the background, and then you can write your answer on the sticky note. And then you can edit or delete your sticky note, right? So what we want to do is we wanted to do something that would give you some opportunities, since we are not in person, that would give you some opportunities to do exactly what you've been talking about, but in a variety of different ways, and make it as fun as you want it to be, okay? There's some other options over there. Do what you want, but we're gonna keep this for you so that you can have it. So page 1, what's your role as a school board? And then page 2, you just click the arrow at the top. What is your role as a school board member? Okay, so, and then you do the same thing. And then we're going to sort of do what, if we were in person, we'd have this up on big sheets of paper, and then we do a gallery walk. This is our effort to do a gallery walk with all of you. So what questions have I raised for you about what we're about to do? Love it when there's no questions. Okay, so I would like to give you maybe about a minute to do a little free writing. So what we'll do is take a moment, let you do some brainstorming, and then we're going to give you 15 minutes to go and populate your Jamboard. All right, let's take a moment to do some brainstorming individually. Okay, looks like we're sort of moving towards, and you can continue to brainstorm. That's the purpose of the Jamboard. Let's see how we are at 11:30 with the Jamboard, and then we'll check back in if you need a little bit more time. Everybody have the link?
Yeah.
All right, everybody familiar with that? Play around with it. Sticky notes, write it, make it fun. All right, let's please populate both pages of the Jamboard. We'll come back and check in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Did you go to the second one? I was supposed to go to the second one too. Oh. Oh.
These are looking great. I feel like we need a few more minutes, especially to populate the second one. So I'm gonna suggest that we come back like at 11:33, 34. I'll check in with you. Give you 5 more minutes. Thank you. All right, this is dope. I'm just looking over them. Want to give you like a couple of minutes to look over them, and then we're going to talk about what we see. And this is a link that will be live, so you can always go back and check it out and all those other things. So, but for now, let's just take a look and see what we see. Again, if we were in person, I would definitely have us walking around, doing a gallery walk, but we're going to do a virtual gallery walk here. And let's look at page 1. What's our role as a collective board, right? In leading these anti-racist efforts. And what I would love for you to do as you're reading through them is just call out, one or two that is that perhaps you didn't put, or maybe that you did, but call out what's something that resonates with you. So I'll give you a moment to look those over. Or if there's any about which you have questions as well, right? So.
Is there an easy way to make some of these texts a little bigger?
I think you can make it bigger on your own screen. I'm not sure. Christy, you know how to make the text. I think when it's a sticky note, it has to fit in on the sticky note.
Editing.
And it goes to that,
Oh, okay,
so you can read it, but
Yeah,
it doesn't,
okay, so
Let
yeah,
me see if there's any way that I can make that larger. I don't see a way to do that.
because some of them are large and some, oh, okay, it's just dependent on how much text there, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
got rid of that.
oh, no, actually, okay. Oh, I clicked on the plus and it makes the whole thing bigger, so that's,
Okay.
What's resonating with y'all?
It bothered me when you made it also ordered. Chaos.
Okay, I'll help jumpstart some conversation. Any questions about call in?
yeah, what is it?
Thank you. So whoever put call in, let's make sure we know what that is.
So I believe I put it on this one. My understanding of what that means is instead of calling out someone and telling them they're wrong, you're calling in to conversation about what has been said. Is that anybody else's?
That makes sense, yeah, I just didn't know what it was, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at ensure the voices of those at the margins have spaces for sharing and healing accessible to them.
I particularly, also that resonated with me, given everything that we talked about today in street data, like, I was like, yes. And then the next question that I know, because all of you are super smart, is like, how we do that? But really, like, if that's one of the strategies that we want to think about, like, all right, how are we hearing from voices at the margins? And again, if we were together and had more time, I would ask, and this is what we'll do for next time, like, what are those that we find in common? Like, so we'll look for common themes, but we're not going to, that's just where we're going. For right now, what else is resonating?
First, thanks for fixing the grammar for me on that last note, whoever did that. Let me switch the sentence around, makes more sense. I think just kind of seeing a theme a little bit, not to go there necessarily, but of learning and listening. So just being proactive learners that are willing to really listen, to understand both ways in which we need to learn and also ways we need to move.
I too see that theme. Thank you. I hear, like, there's a theme of the work that needs to happen from some of the social emotional pieces, right? Like the notion of being self-aware, awareness, listening, proactive, be informed, right? Like, I feel like those are all the pieces of that that social emotional piece that we need to think about. So I see that we're already making meaning. This is just what we do as humans. And then this notion of being eager learners. Love also, there's some policy pieces in there, right? Like ensure anti-racist vision is in the STRAT plan. Super important as school districts. Pass co-design policies that make possible the anti-racist vision we have for our district. Listen, that is a policy person right there, throwing that in there, because the piece that is that's really big there is co-designed policies. So I was like, uh-oh, that's real. That's okay. I see that. Make anti-racist work a budget priority and ensure it's represented in spending. This is all policy work. And I love that because as board members, like, you guys really impact policy. So I love those pieces too. So I love that there was the social emotional pieces and then the policy pieces. And then there seems to be a little bit about, like, how do we get to know the folks in our own district? And I thought that was really beautiful, like get to know students, practice deep listening, build coalitions and affinity groups, really know student, staff, community, their needs, their concerns, knowledge, dreams, desires, inspirations. I was like, wow, what a lofty goal for board members who are usually seen as being really far away from students, right? In the work, right? So it's like, what if this is a board that can dream and design ways that you are really in deep community with the folks that you're serving? That was just super wonderful. And then we talked about pedagogy, data plus stories, not just the data, right? And this learning environment, right? And then hold ourselves accountable. I thought this was great. Next time we meet, we're going to be coming right back to these, because it's like, all right, what are we going to do with them? But yes, this was wonderful. Let's go to page 2, because I want to make sure that you're out on time. So what's resonating with y'all about this one?
I think I'm seeing just kind of like a lot of willingness or openness, perhaps, to like not be right within, yeah.
I also see a lot of strategies of how to do that. Right. So taking risks, being aware of bias, asking questions, being open to kind of hearing the responses to those, right?
Yeah, there's several of them to start with, ask questions.
I really like that, truly hear conversations and accept what is being said. I think that accepting can often be really hard, right? Um,
I love that though, because in the first part, you're talking about the board creating space for other people to share honesty. This is like, right, how do I actually make sure I hear the spaces that right, the voices that are elevated in the spaces that we created?
I don't want to take up too much. Oh, Jen, were you about to go?
Well, I have two things swirling around in my head and I don't know whether to verbalize them or not, but I will anyway. One of them is, it feels like trauma informed needs to be in here somewhere. It seems like we kind of put that in a different category sometimes, but when we're doing anti-racist work, it feels like we do need to be trauma informed. In how we do it and who we're working with. And the other thing is, you know, I don't know how to say the other one, never mind.
You should put the trauma informed on.
Well, do you think, I mean, do you think trauma informed goes,
I think it's an important thought.
okay,
I mean, this is just,
No right or wrong.
yeah. jamboree.
I was gonna say, it's not a right or wrong situation. We put in what we think needs to be up there.
The one thing that I always am interested in is also that the assumptions about what we think we know based on the perspective of a few. And that goes to all ends of the spectrum, right? And the other bigger piece that is that I'm always interested in this, and I try to work on too, is when you have the conversations or you hear a perspective that does not align with the same vision and mission that you have, understanding that that is that person's perspective. They are a part of the community. So it's how to respond to those kinds of pieces, sometimes which may be public and sometimes which may be private.
Did you want to put that on the Jamboard? And also, could you give me a little bit more about that? I think I know what you're saying, but I'm just checking for my own understanding.
Yeah, you mean when you hear something that you may not have been expecting? Yeah. So one might be making an assumption that a person or group that represents a demographic that we talk about a lot, whether that be someone who has a lot of money or not a lot of money, and an assumption that they might think a certain way. And when you get a response to listening that doesn't conform to whatever preconceived notion you may have, like, oh, well, this is a person who's poor, I'm assuming that they just want a lot more money, doesn't line up with that. Or someone who says someone's got a lot of resources, they just want to protect their resources, that might not line up with that. So
I thought that's what was going, and it kind of reminds me of the example I gave you about assumptions, right? With the lady who was like, do you know the owners? And so that we do have to come from a place of humility, right? Whenever we're engaging with people. And what this really says to me is like everything on Jamboard number 2 on page 2 reminds me of the need for more and more training around social emotional processes, awareness, vulnerability, all the soft skills things, which I think is really interesting because the quote that someone put, the heartbeat of anti-racism is confession, admission, acknowledgement, and willingness to be vulnerable. And so I was like, wow, like as I saw it, first of all, let me congratulate all of you in doing the Jamboard. I thought this was really, really good. Like, really better than we thought. Like, it's amazing. Thank you. And I'm seeing your own awareness and own admission of we've got to lean more into our humility. We've got to lean more into our vulnerability, which is all that social emotional work that we all talk about that we want people to do in education and not necessarily actually do it, right? So this is good for on two levels. I think Chris and I will be able to take this and help craft some things for our next meeting. I also think as we revisit the vision that you want to share, maybe some of that language can be found in that vision. Like, we commit to take action to being better listeners, to blah, 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 blah. You know, so I think some of those things are really, really, really critically important. And if you look back on page 1, and then you look to page 2, if you toggle back and forth like I've been doing, the reality for me is, in order to get to the policies, in order to get to the classroom, in order to get to building coalition, in order to understand, we could hear the data, but to understand the story behind the data, we have to be in a place to do all the things on page 2. And that's the beauty of this, that you guys came to that on your own. And so our job is to help you get there. So I thought this was really, really cool. I also want to point out that one person said, decenter myself. And I want to thank you for that. Right? Because I'm assuming that the person who said that was white. And really, the way to move through racism is through decentering whiteness. Chris, I'm sure you've got some pieces to say about this too. So I don't want to do all the talking.
No, how I've been reading these is, which I think echoes what Rochelle, what you just said, is, I mean, the second board is actually the one that is leading, right? How you all are, how we are as people allows us to then create policies that enact, right? So, right, we create space all the time for voice, but we actually don't fundamentally listen to that voice, right? So if you're leading with the school board modeling how to actually listen deeply, that's a decentering process, right? That then makes it, when you create more spaces, those spaces are more effective because there's already a conversation of, no, this board is a little bit different. This board is totally engaged in listening already at a individualized level, right? So that changes. That opens up the spaces that you're talking about opening up, right? So you have the process of creating, right, brave space already by modeling that. That's the first thing that I think about. So I actually read the first one as, here's your personal responsibilities that then enable the entire board to move, right? So to the extent to which all of you are modeling this in the ways that you model them differently, of course, that makes the work of the board a lot more easy as a collective conversation. That's part one. Part two is I think about this kind of like how you actually cultivate spaces. So one on the first page is required data and stories and board presentations. And how you cultivate those stories, the depth of those stories, right? We don't share public story spaces around trauma. So I love the connecting the trauma informed in here. We don't do that because that's a public opening up of trauma, right? And that filters down to the classroom level. So you all modeling how to normalize data as experiences navigating a racist system then makes it so much easier for teachers who are also trying to help children learn a language of naming what's around them too. Right. So there's a seamless kind of alignment if you are all modeling this well. Right. Because teachers also aren't prepared to do this work. Right. So seeing you also model it, obviously they have different strategies when they're working with 6-year-olds than when, right. But kind of the strategies are different.
So I'm realizing, at least as I'm looking at this, most of this is passive. And it doesn't have anything about us being changed by what we hear. Or what I mean, we're acknowledging that we need to learn and grow. It doesn't say that we learn and grow. I'm just questioning even my own language in this as to how passive it is and how does it really get us anywhere toward change.
Well, I do want to sort of push back a little bit. Like, I think that the first step in getting towards change is to acknowledge what your steps are, right? And so if I'm looking at being open to learning, if I'm looking at listening and being brave and accountable, then at the end of that, I can go back and say, man, I spent the last 6 months taking risks, being much more self-aware, thinking outside the box. And as a result, these things happened. I'm not sure I can say I'm going to do all this without doing these things first. So I think it's a both and. I love, Jan, that you're like, wait a minute, we need to be more active. I would say taking risks is not passive. Being aware of bias is not passive. Listening shouldn't be passive. And what I'm hearing you say is, so what happens after I listen, right? Which is getting to the next step, which I think that's the very same thing that I want you to be thinking about, and that we will hopefully be able to discuss at our next session when we go from, this is what we said we were going to do, so now what's the next step? But mentoring, even this notion of having trauma-informed practice requires us to practice. So I get exactly what you're saying, but I think this is the first step. And I want to encourage you that there's going to be tons of steps. And somewhere we have be willing to be wrong. So we're going to make these steps and then we're going to mess up and then we get to go back and try again. And it becomes circuitous.
I also think there's a trusting yourself and trusting the spaces that you're creating for other people. Voice-centric spaces where folks get to share their stories, experiences, often also come with demands. Right. So if we're creating an authentic space where folks can say, this is my experience in this community, in the school, in life, rarely, and I'm thinking specifically around students and student voice, rarely do students then just stop talking.
Right.
Oh, y'all are listening to me. Hold up. You know what else is wrong that I need you to fix, right? So part of the decentering work is actually, yes, you all have your own change processes as humans, but giving and sharing space to fostered voices means letting other folks also tell you what we all need to do. Right.
I guess I'm bringing that forward because I had a 2-hour meeting last night, a cross-cultural discussion with folks where they all said what they needed to say. And I don't think there's any change coming. So it was a pretty heated discussion, and I'm right, you're wrong. You're right, I'm wrong, or whatever. And so, yeah, we could do all of that. And sometimes it doesn't move us anywhere, and hopefully this does. But I'm just coming off of that experience, so that's why I'm where I am.
Yeah.
No, I hear you. Thank you for sharing that.
I think, yeah, the other thing I was thinking about this whole thing is that probably should today, but there needs to be a feedback loop of some sort, because so often, you know, we just listen and then it's not apparent at all that
We heard.
yeah, I mean, and that's why, you know, last year we had a session with our listening session with our civics classes at Foster High School, and the students threw out a whole lot of things, and I wanted to make sure that, you know, we gave them some feedback, and that, okay, we heard this, and this is going on, and this isn't going on, or whatever. So I think that feedback loop is really is really important, whatever it may be. I mean, it's not always necessarily gonna be, we completely agree, but at least, you know,
We acknowledge.
some acknowledge that we actually heard what you had to say in some way, so that they can, yeah.
I appreciate that. I mean, so I use the word feedback. I use feedback cycles rather than data cycles in street data, partially because feedback cycles there's a process that we're committing to. That's obviously what street data talks about, but I use that more actively than data, because data means it's like information that just sits there, right? The other thing is I think about, as you all iron out a little bit more about your role as the school board versus, so who is actually responding to feedback cycles? Often it's actually not you all collectively as the school board, but the educators who are responsible for creating the spaces for the students to then move on some of this work. So you all lead the direction shaping and efforts around that. But ultimately, most of the demands that students are making or will be making are more tangible to their day-to-day experience in schools, which is the educators that they're mostly working with, right? So part of that is your responsibility, obviously, but some of that is also the hierarchy of you like getting out of the way for educators to do the work, but ensuring that you're shaping, and I think you list this on here, ensuring that you're shaping the space for those policies to actually be implemented.
And I want us to, first of all, acknowledge where we are now, right? When we started working in October, it was like, I'm not really sure what this is. I think maybe this is something, there was a lot of conversation about community and they may not like it or whatever, right? And then we moved towards, yes, we as a school board, I guess some feedback. As a school board, we are committed and we need to know how. So then we said, okay, what are a couple of strategies that we want to work on? And so we started to name some things. And then we said, well, what are our roles? How are we supposed to be? And this notion of being, as Chris said, I don't know, like Chris, I wanted to be like, no, Chris, you need to say it again. When we demonstrate the different ways that we're going to be moving, we give permission to the educators who are working with our children to move differently. So I see this as step one in a long line of steps, but understanding how we can dream and design how we're going to be differently as leaders, as school board. This is what I said, you guys are nimble enough to make some shifts, allows Dr. Herndon and the leaders, the school site leaders, to be able to create something differently as well for the students to whom we're listening. So there's lots of pieces here. Let me give you some concrete next steps, and apologies for taking you over. You know, no matter how many times we design this, we're like, oh no, do we have enough? And then we always go over. We're going to work on it as an area of growth. The first thing that we really want you to do is to know that you'll have access to the Jamboard. So we'll send that link so you can be looking at this. We are going to ask you to choose just one something that you can work on over the next couple of months from this page 2. Just one. Whether it's, I'm going to work on decentering myself. I'm going to work on taking more risks. I'm going to work on being more aware of bias, right? Or I'm going to work on talking less and listening more. Like whatever that is, we're going to ask you to just choose one to help shift. And this is getting to you, Jan. Like, and then we're going to ask you, like, the first question when we meet on March 11th is, okay, so what were the actions that were different as a result of you deciding to do this? So this is homework and accountability. So once again, you're going to choose one of these strategies on page 2 that you're like, I'm really going to work on this over the next couple of months. And then when we get together in March, we're going to be like, all right, so you chose to talk less, listen more. What concrete things happened when you started making those changes in your lives? Okay, so that's the first homework-esque type thing. The other thing is you have all the books and choose one. and start reading it. And so I know that some of you have already read some work around street data. And if you finish one, what I always tell students is there's no harm in reading another. So choose something that you want to read. We're going to be asking you to share in March some gleanings, learnings, tidbits from the readings that you've been doing. So first thing, choose one. Asking you in March, hey, how has your life changed? What's happening? What are the actions? Second thing, read something and then talk to us about it. And what does that mean? The other thing is we're going to be looking at this and trying to find some themes that we can share with you. One of the themes is obviously around social emotional learning. And so wanting to make sure that you're aware of that and what that means and what that can look like. So we'll be looking at that as part of our homework. We meet on Dr. Herndon. I know I sent you an email. We went back and forth on this. We were trying to get a meeting where I would be in town, but that's not going to happen given some other schedulings. So what we have, Dr. Herndon, is Saturday, March 11th. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's what we have down, but let me go through and just confirm that that's what we have with everybody else. I think that's what we have scheduled. We
Okay.
have, yeah, the only reason I say it is we have been contemplating moving Saturdays off of Saturdays into a different day, but that's why I want to take a look at the whole calendar of what we have.
Let us know. The earlier the better. And we'll definitely put that together. And I know also, Dr. Herndon, we want to talk about not doing something in June, but rather moving that to May. So we'll get with you, Dr. Herndon, Chris and I will get with you at our meeting to discuss those things. And we can always jump on a call or a text or whatever, so we can get those dates. But we do know we have 2 more sessions with the board and we're excited about them.
Awesome. Yes.
What questions have I raised for you as we move you? I know you're like, this is an abrupt ending, but we wanted to really end on like, what's my step? What's my next step? What's my next concrete action step? And so we want to leave you with that. What questions have I raised for you?
More than could be answered right now, so. Which, hopefully is the point of all this.
Exactly.
Just
Feel free
so
to
much-
reach out.
So much gratitude for y'all being here today, and just always take so much away from learning moments like this. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here while you're sick. Like, I don't do that. So like, I'm appreciative as well. Hearing no questions, feel free to reach out. I think you all have our email by now, and we will send the link so that you can keep the link for the Jamboard. And this is the ongoing work. All right. We look forward to seeing you hopefully March 11th, but whenever, it'll be sometime in March.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have to,
Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
Go
Dr.
Hawks,
Herndon, for
too.
hosting.
You bet.
do we have to officially adjourn, I think? And
Oh,
close the
I'm sorry.
recording? Oh, no, don't be sorry, you're fine.
Officially adjourned with some
Just
kind
for
of
the
Go
record,
Hawks.
right? I think so. Oh, yeah, I can add that in. Okay, so I'll accept a motion to adjourn our meeting.
So, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you.
Feel better.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Exactly. Thank you all.